Hi, this is Steve, and I want to welcome you to another Tech Leader Talk discussion. This interview is part of the Space Tech Innovation event, where space tech leaders share their latest trends and key insights that can grow any tech company. The event is free, and you can register at spacetechinnovation.com to see all the videos, the edited transcripts, and an executive summary of each interview. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Shelli Brunswick to launch the Space Tech Innovation event. Shelli's the Chief Operating Officer of Space Foundation and has a broad perspective on the space ecosystem. She's worked with space technology during her service with the United States Air Force and in her current role with Space Foundation. Shelli advocates for space tech innovation, entrepreneurship, diversity, and inclusion. And during our interview, she talks about how space technology innovation is impacting our daily lives here on Earth. And she also explains what's driving the rapid growth of space related companies. And she talks about new collaboration opportunities in the space industry between commercial, governmental, and educational sectors. And she shares her excitement about the increasing number of women in the space industry. I'm sure you're going to enjoy this discussion, learn about the space industry, and take away a few tips that you can use in your own business. So let's get to the discussion with Shelli. Hey, Shelli. I want to thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to an exciting discussion about space, workforce, women, entrepreneurship, innovation.
Yep.
We're going to cover a lot of topics today.
Those are all fun topics, and I love space just like you do. I was telling a friend the other day that I can remember, this dates me just a little bit, either the first or second grade, huddling around a little black and white TV in elementary school, watching Apollo launches or watching the splashdowns. So that was a couple of years ago, but it's even more
Just
exciting now.
just a couple of years ago, but obviously with the launch of Artemis, it's going to be a really exciting generation coming
Yep.
out.
Yeah, a whole new round. Um, Tell us a little bit about, you've been involved with space and space activities for quite a few years. Tell us how you got started and kind of what's kept you in this space world and how it led to what you're doing today.
Absolutely. Well, I always like to say my journey has three chapters. So those three chapters are, right out of high school, I enlisted in the US Air Force.
Mhm.
The second chapter was I became an officer in the Air Force. And the third chapter is what I'm doing today as the Chief Operating Officer at Space Foundation. So when I enlisted in the Air Force at 18 years old, I was probably like a lot of your listeners. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't have college money. And the Air Force offered an opportunity to see the world, learn a
Mhm.
profession, and earn some college money. Fortunately, while I was enlisted, I did get stationed in Turkey and Germany, so I got to explore the world.
Fun.
My career at that time was personnel, so HR. And then I also earned college money, but I also took advantage of opportunities and went to school at night and completed both my bachelor's and master's degrees. And I
Oh.
applied to become an officer in the Air Force. And the Air Force, not the first time, but the second time, and we can talk about that later. Sometimes you just got to keep trying.
Yep.
The second time, I was selected to become a space program management officer for the Air Force. So that really started my career journey, and that's brought me to where I am today. So, a 25-year career in the space industry, courtesy of the US Air Force. And of course, at that time, I really had no idea what that was or what I'd be doing. And I'm so grateful that I embraced, the great unknown and jumped into the space sector.
So were you kind of assigned to that category by the Air Force? It's like, here's where we want to put you, and then you learn it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So I have a business degree, so an undergraduate and an MBA. So not your typical space person. Typical space person is a STEM professional: science,
Yeah.
technology, engineering, math. However, with a business background, you could be a program manager. So I went and worked in
Interesting.
LA at LA Air Force Base, the Space and Missile System Center. That's what it was called at that time,
Hmm.
and worked on programs like ground station, launch vehicles, satellites, and that's how I learned the space business. Was from the project management side of procuring those new infrastructures and technology.
Okay. So when you left the Air Force, you obviously had options to do a lot of different civilian things, but you stayed with space. So what is it about space that's exciting to you or passion or whatever?
So as you highlighted to your audience, there are always lots of opportunities in really finding what's your passion and where do you feel you can have an impact. And
Mhm.
having an impact is really important to me. So when I did retire from the Air Force, at that time I worked on Capitol Hill. So I was there to help secure the budget for the Air Force. So you can imagine there were a lot of opportunities. I could be a project manager, like I was. I could work on Capitol Hill or be a government affairs individual because that's what I was also doing my last 5 years in the Air Force. But the job opportunity came across my desk to apply to become the chief operating officer at Space Foundation.
Mhm.
And I'll have to tell you, at the time, I kind of questioned it because I was like, do I meet these requirements? Is this for me? And one of my colleagues said, never disqualify yourself from an opportunity you haven't been offered. And to this day, I thank Vanessa because of her advice, I applied for the position. And 176 candidates later, I became the chief operating officer at Space Foundation.
Wow.
And and it was my number one choice for a couple of reasons. One, I did love space. I think it's an exciting industry. And at that time, space was not cool. I mean, it's cool now, but it wasn't cool then. But it was really about having an impact and creating a difference. And Space Foundation is a 501(c)(3) for education. And at this point in my career, for me, it's really about giving back. How do I create the next generation
Mhm.
to come up in the space industry to unlock innovation and solve many of our challenges here on Earth? So it was the best opportunity to do that.
Okay. So I know in looking at your background, one of your roles in Space Foundation is overseeing the Center for Innovation and Education. So what kind of things are you doing in that role to help with innovation and tying that into the education component?
Absolutely. So the Center for Innovation Education has three main departments, and one is our Space Foundation Discovery Center, another is our educational programs K through 12, and then we have adult learning. So with our Discovery Center, that is a facility located here in Colorado Springs, and it's open to the public. We also do student field trips. So it's an opportunity
Okay.
to provide that awareness that space could be an opportunity for you and how space benefits us every day. With our K through 12 educational programs, we have built a leadership academy that starts with primary school, middle school, high school, so that we're building that future workforce to fill the jobs of the space industry. And we also do teacher professional development because if we can
Okay.
empower teachers, then we can reach many more students. And then that third component about adult learning is really about how do we help entrepreneurs uh, commercialize space technology? How do we help college students come into the space industry? How do we look to reskill and upskill individuals who might say, I've always wanted to be in the space industry, but I don't know how? And we're here to help you. So that's the three main things that the Center for Innovation and Education focuses on.
What kind of activities do you do? I'm thinking for entrepreneurs or somebody who wants to start a business or transition into this. What kind of activities do you offer for those people?
Excellent. So we have a couple of opportunities. One, you could say, I want to be an entrepreneur, but I don't know how and I don't know what space is. You can go to our spacefoundation.org website, go to Space Commerce Institute, swipe your credit card, and you could take a webinar and learn about the space industry and how you could create a business plan and a positioning
Okay.
statement and how you could come into the industry, whether you have an idea or you want to go. A great place to look is the NASA Tech Transfer Office. They have thousands of patents that are waiting to be commercialized. So even if you don't have an idea, but you want to be an entrepreneur, I always say start at the NASA Tech Transfer Office. Anyone can apply to commercialize that technology. So one, you could swipe your credit card. Two, we also partner with organizations. So we'll partner with NASA or Berkeley or Nova
Mhm.
Southeastern University, where we bring our programs and partner with them to facilitate that entrepreneurial activity with accelerators and incubators, not just in the
Oh,
United States, though, but also around the world.
okay. Wow. It's interesting. It is so different now. When I went through engineering school, yeah, there was a little bit of space. It was NASA. That was about it in our country. But it's great to see all these other options. What a lot of people, uh, maybe else in or outside the tech world, think of space as kind of its own industry off by itself. And there's space activities, and then there's earthbound activities. But that's not, is my understanding, that's not the case. That a lot of the space technology is highly relevant or applicable on this planet. How how does that work? Do you have an example or two of that where space technology is helping those of us who are Earth based?
Absolutely. I'm going to highlight all of us are Earth based. So I think for all of us on
Yeah.
humanity, we're using space every day. So there are 16 different economic sectors that we look at Space Foundation.
Oh,
One of them is that pure space play that you talked about, rockets and astronauts. But the other 15 sectors relate to what we do every day, whether it's agriculture, finance, education, the health industry. So I'm just going to start with my favorite tool right here, which is my iPhone. I'm sure many of you all have a cell phone. I think most people have a cell phone. And one of my favorite things to do is if you know me and follow me on social media is I love to do selfies. Well, that technology in your phone to do that selfie came from NASA and it came from imaging technology from satellites. And now then it was
oh,
commercialized and put into phones. So it's not in every phone, the NASA version, but that was the start of it. And then
mhm.
that has led to other technology and improvements. So that's just one example of
Wow.
how we're using space. But we're talking on Zoom right now. This would not have been possible without space and cybersecurity to have this type of telecommunication conference without space technology. We also can think about agriculture. The John Deere tractors are using GPS to do precision agriculture, which
Mhm.
increases crop yields by 10%. We're moving then those crops around the planet using GPS to ship them in the shipping lanes. So even GPS, which started as a military application, most people now know GPS. They use it in their cars, they're
Sure.
navigating. They might get mad at it because it takes them down the wrong street. But ultimately,
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with some friends over the holidays, and we were all talking about what did we do before GPS? We used to buy those big Thomas Guide books, and
Yep.
you used to figure out how did you find streets. And my husband was a firefighter, so they had all these maps and how do you find a street to go to a fire. So even just thinking about that
Mhm.
type of technology in our daily life has revolutionized how industries, even like firefighters, do their job every day.
Mhm. Interesting. Yeah, wide ranging applications. So, in the last few years, with some of the private spacecraft companies, it seems like it's just, I don't want to use the word exploding. It's taking off rapidly. What what's behind that? Is it technical advancements, or what do you think is helping fuel that?
Well, I think there's a couple things fueling it. One, there's a passion for space. I mean, you can
Hmm.
see some individuals that are willing to spend their money to create the infrastructure to
Mm.
space. And, we can talk about Richard Branson and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, but in essence, what they're doing with what we call space tourism, which is just a small way of defining it, is they're really building that infrastructure to the future of space. And so you
Yeah.
can think about it when we built the roads in the United States across the country, how that opened up the country to transportation, to commercialization, and innovation, and led to a great industrial revolution. Well, you can think about the same thing. Yes, we are doing space tourism. But as we're building that infrastructure to space, which, by the way, private citizens are doing with their money,
Hmm.
we're also creating new opportunities for economic development. So in November, I believe it was November, the White House came out with what does cislunar economy look like? What will the economy of operating between here and the moon consist of? And what are those business opportunities that are available? And you're seeing, private space stations that are being considered for commercial use. You're seeing manufacturing in space, and what will that entail? So you're really seeing this new frontier of economic development that's happening that will take place in space, but ultimately benefit us here on Earth. And that's the big
Hmm.
tie. When people hear about space and space tourism, they may think that they're separated from this technological advancements, but actually those technological advancements benefit us here on Earth. We're already doing experiments on the International Space Station. We're already doing pharmaceutical trials and drug trials
Hmm.
that will benefit us here on Earth. One of those was an osteoporosis drug that will help women who, have bones that become brittle over time, and men suffer too, but primarily women. And we're having a large company did experiments and brought that product to market much sooner than they would have done had they done those experiments on Earth. I know
Interesting.
another doctor who is doing some experiments on the International Space Station to 3D print lens replacements for your eyes because We suffer, many people get macular degeneration and it causes you to lose your sight. And right now, there is no treatment.
Mm,
And so, this doctor, during her dissertation, came up with this. She's partnered with NASA and she's now doing the trials, the FDA trials on the International Space Station to
mm,
3D print that lens
mhm.
in a much better fashion than we could do it here on Earth. So I share with
Interesting.
you that these things that are happening in space are benefiting us here on Earth.
Mhm. Okay. You've you've also talked about some of the collaboration. It's like when I was really young, it was in the United States, it was NASA. That was the facility or the organization. Today, it's we've got commercial, government, and also the education sectors. And how are they collaborating, and how is that opening new opportunities?
Well, it is a very different world that we live in than I'll say the Apollo era of 60 years ago. So you gave a
Mhm,
great example. When we think about the Apollo era, we think it was two countries, primarily government employees, STEM professionals that were doing a space race, right? It was really about national security.
mhm.
Here we are 60 years later. We do have government still involved, but we also have, as you said, industry, academia, international. Now there are more than 90 countries operating in space. And where
Wow.
we had STEM professionals, we're now seeing a huge diversity of careers. The Space Foundation partnered with the White House and NASA to come out with a game called the Moon Colony Kit. And we sent this game to Title I schools so that kids can learn about 50 different careers in the space industry and how they could find an opportunity for them. And
Wow.
those careers could be political science to policy making, program management, teachers, astronauts, artists, entrepreneurs, and it could be anywhere from high school to PhD. So this game was to help our future workforce understand that there is a role for them in the future space economy, and we want to help build that workforce of the future. So that's one of
Mhm.
the ways we're working with NASA, the White House, and other organizations to create that future workforce and highlight the differences in the space industry from today and the past 60 years.
Okay. Do you think when you take a government organization and bring in a commercial that in general, this is a huge generalization, but a lot of companies are more profit minded and results focused. And does that change the way the government's going to operate, or maybe even and help the commercial too to see the government side of things and maybe merge those two thought process together?
Well, I'm going to put on my acquisition hat from back when I was a program manager in the Air Force and kind of highlight that the role of the government is to lean into risk that industry does not want to pursue.
Okay.
Because like you said, industry has to make a profit to stay in business. So, what
Mhm.
is the real role of government? Government's role is to go into areas that have high risk, like space exploration, new technologies, new ways of doing things, and invest in that quantum, hypersonics, and invest in that technology development until it reaches a point of maturity that the commercial sector can take it over. And so you can
Mhm.
look at that with rockets, up until 2004 when legislation was passed for commercial crew, which allowed for the commercialization of launch vehicles. The government did all launches, either the Air Force or NASA. But now
Mhm.
you can see we have multiple rocket companies,
Yeah.
and that is a very, you know, um, industry now, commercial focus. And you can look at that as we continue into low Earth orbit. For a long time, that was really a NASA and government led area of space, low Earth orbit. But now we
Mhm.
can see the government can really move out of low Earth orbit, allow commercialization and that investment from commercialization to take that piece over as NASA and other government agencies focus on the moon and Mars and more exploration to
Mhm.
better humanity. So I think it's less about the government or industry, and it's more how do they work together to ultimately move technology forward.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, they can support each other. I know you're passionate about diversity and expanding the number of women involved in space. What's how are you active in that, and what are others doing to kind of increase this diversity?
That's an excellent question. So I always call it IDEA. So it's inclusivity, diversity, equity, and access. And, yes, we want diversity, inclusivity, and equity, but we have to have an access point. And the Space Foundation, we have a 5-step workforce development roadmap, and it's awareness, access, training, connecting, and mentoring. So, first, you have to be aware that there's an opportunity. But then
Mhm.
that second stage is so important, that access point. How do we help women in diversity and different regions of the world come into the space industry? And so at Space Foundation, we do that with a lot of our programs. We have a young professional, in that Center for Innovation Education. I have a young professional program for adult learning, partnerships with industry, partnerships with universities, that K through 12 training of how can we help young kids understand that there's a future for them in the space industry.
Mhm.
And then personally, I do a lot of mentoring. I am a mentor for the Space for Women, which is an affiliated program for the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs. I'm also a mentor for a program called the Um, Global Policy, Diplomacy, and Sustainability Fellowship Program, which is a global program, and I help to mentor about space opportunities, and a lot of it focuses on climate change. And then I also mentor for an organization called Women Tech Network. But there are other mentoring organizations for your listeners. There's Space Generation Advisory Council also has a great program. So there are other programs out there, but those are the couple that I volunteer my time for. And I always enjoy meeting new people, learning about them, and mentoring is really a two-way street. I have to tell you, I learn a lot from all my proteges about social media and reels and YouTube. And so I learn a lot about what I need to stay current as well. So it's a two-way street. So that's one way that I believe in giving back.
Okay. What changes would you like to see in the next few years for more access, more inclusion, more diversity?
Well, I think we're seeing a great shift in that throughout the
Okay.
world. I'm seeing a movement across Africa, across the Middle East, across other regions of the world that really want to empower women and entrepreneurship and innovation. And so you can see a lot of programs that are being developed. The
Okay.
Space Foundation is being contacted about creating and partnering with, for instance, the African Union. We're in discussions with the African Union about bringing our programs across to Africa. So we're seeing that opportunity for partnership, both with organizations like the Space Foundation, nonprofits, but you're also seeing that at the national level. In December, you had President Biden hosted the US Africa Summit, and there was a side conversation or a side event that focused on US Africa space relations. This week, President Biden is in Mexico, and next week, I will be meeting with the Mexican legislators to discuss space and innovation and women empowerment and how
Great.
the space industry can participate in that. So you're really seeing, um, not just in the US, but around the world, this idea of inclusivity and how do we bring everyone to the table, not just for economic development, but also to solve our greatest challenges here on Earth.
Okay. That's great. That's yeah. The team approach can do a lot better. If you're thinking about the space ecosystem kind of as a whole, what are some of the biggest challenges that they're facing today?
Well, we'll talk about the plus side right now. The plus side is in 2021, the global space economy was $469 billion. And by 2030, it's going to be $1.4 trillion,
Oh,
depending on which financial analyst you listen to, Bank of America or CNBC.
mhm.
And by 2040, we're going to be over $3 trillion. And again, that's not
Mm.
just space assets, that's also that agriculture, healthcare, education. But what we're seeing as some of the biggest challenges are that workforce shortage, the skills deficit, the innovation gap. So, workforce shortage. Here in the US, we do have a workforce shortage in the space industry, in the aviation industry, in the entrepreneurial industry. So, how do we create not only today's workforce to pivot into those new jobs, but how do we create the future workforce? And then we're looking at that skills deficit. So somebody says, I want to come into the space industry and I want to be a rocket scientist. Well, you're going to probably need a degree. But maybe somebody is a project manager in another
Right.
industry and wants to come into the space industry. So, how do we maybe reskill and upskill them to take those project management skills, learn the space portion of it, and come into this industry? So, workforce shortage, skills deficit, and then that innovation gap. America has been a country of entrepreneurs. And so, what we really need to do is inspire entrepreneurs to go to the NASA Tech Transfer Office. The European Space Agency has a tech transfer office. The Japanese Space Agency has a tech transfer office. The Air Force has a tech transfer office. The Department of Energy. I can go on and look at these patents and say, I would like to apply for this patent and look to commercialize this technology and bring it forward to help humanity. And there are grants that not only can they apply for the patent, but they can apply for a grant to help them figure out a business plan and look at getting resources. And then again, the Space Foundation has our programs through our Center for Innovation Education to help entrepreneurs, but there are other programs as well. There's PTAC and there's Manufacturers Edge, so there's a lot of state and local resources that can help entrepreneurs. So those are the three challenges I see: that workforce shortage, skills deficit, and innovation gap. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to work together to solve them. And it
Okay.
not just in America, but with our partners around the world.
All right. Is that we talked about earlier, the kind of the collaboration between commercial, government, education?
Yes.
Are they working together on those, at least to some extent?
Absolutely. We know from our partnership with the White House and the Department of Labor, we're all working together to look at this space workforce and how we work
Yeah.
together. But the Space Foundation, we have partnerships with organizations around the world. I mentioned the African Union, so that's
Mhm.
55 countries, the
Okay.
Organization of American States. We have a great relationship with the UAE, with an organization called ISESCO, the Islamic World Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. 54 member countries, over 400 partner universities. So
Wow.
the Space Foundation is doing a lot of that thought leadership to help these organizations that are covering billions of people on the planet. When you think about it, Africa,
Mhm.
South America,
Sure.
we are covering a large swaths with our thought leadership of how we can work together to create economic opportunity,
Mhm.
space science awareness, and how individuals can come into the space science technology application and commercialization and solving challenges. And let's not forget those policymakers, coming up with space laws, because right now, all our activity in space is through some treaties we've created 50 years ago. We're now looking at how do we figure out new ways to operate in space, new ways to operate on the moon? How will we work together, other countries, other regions of the world? One of those is with NASA leading the Artemis Accords, which is kind of a guideline of how will we work together in space. So I kind
Mhm.
of share with you, it's not about just the technology and going to space. It's also about how do we all work together as we leave the planet to live together off the planet.
Mhm. Well, one of the current
So
issues that sorry, go ahead.
yeah, so there's a lot of opportunities for your audience to say, "Wow, you could be a lawyer, you could be," so there's lots of opportunities to come into the space industry and help us solve these things.
Mhm. I just saw, as we record this in January, there's been some recent articles about how to handle space debris, which, I
Yes.
mean, until recently, I didn't realize that's like space is huge. How could that be an issue? But just, yeah, kind of different countries getting together and figuring out how we're going to manage this and clean up now and not repeat it in the future. So, yeah, all kinds of new
Exactly.
issues and all kinds of, being a lawyer, all kinds of new legal issues that are going to pop up once you leave Earth. It's like, well, whose law controls and how do we who owns the moon, things like that. So,
Well, there are some great conversations about, um, and these are things I'll share here, but some of the lawyers think about what happens when there's a murder in space. What jurisdiction covers that? What happens
yeah,
when two citizens are off world, they have a child? I mean, there's all kinds of, we're talking about just who owns what on the moon or the Mars, but there's all kinds of other things we have to
yeah,
think about. I even talked to some health specialists, space and medicine, and living off world, um, like on the International Space Station versus living on the moon versus living on Mars, are all very different for the human health. And so even
yeah,
understanding those technological advances and how will we as a species that was created to live on this planet be able to live off this planet.
yeah. A lot of opportunity to explore those areas.
So for the audience, there's lots of opportunity. Come on into the space industry. We got lots of opportunities for you to join us.
Mhm. What's I do lots of reading, and I'm curious, what's a favorite book that you've read recently?
So I have one of my favorite books right here for you. Let's see. Boop, there we go.
There it is. Humans
Um,
at Work. Okay.
so it's Humans at Work, The Art and Practice of Creating the Hybrid Workplace by Anna Tavis and my good friend. Stella Lupushore. So this is really about thinking about the future of creating a human-centric workplace. So
Okay.
outlining 4 factors of how the workforce has changed with digitization of work, distribution of work, how we're no longer all co-located,
Mm.
organizational redesign, and then the changing workforce. So this book will really help leaders who are looking at how has the workforce changed and how can I hire the best quality talent and create the workforce that they want to stay in. A lot of workplaces are based on a 1950s model of kind of that corporate work. I come in, I work 8 hours a day, or I'm on a
Yeah.
manufacturing floor. But I think we all know the world has changed, and
Yeah.
COVID helped us really with a lot of the were there opportunities for people to work from home. So now we're looking at what is hybrid work? How does hybrid work help women? Because women are primarily the caregivers, right, for children as well
Mhm.
as older parents, maybe. So hybrid work may really help foster that idea, that equal access to work when we look at women needing more flex schedules and job sharing. But we also see the future workforce, right? We can see the kids that are coming up and they're graduating college. They have a very different perception of what work is, and they want to
Yeah.
be more fluid and they want to have more opportunities to take sabbaticals or change jobs a lot or work remotely. So we as a industry, the space industry or other industries, have to really reevaluate what we think work is. Because I don't want to give away how old I am, but I shared with you I've been in the space industry more than 25 years. So work for me was you showed up every day, you worked long hours, and that's what you did, and you were very focused on one thing. But what I'm seeing nowadays is this generation, they want to focus on many things. They want to
Mhm.
be engineers and dancers. And this is a true story because I'm starting to write a book on empowering women in STEM. And I interviewed this amazing engineer who just graduated college, who has 4 patents pending. And she's also created a nonprofit to provide dance to underprivileged kids because she believes that dance allows her to also think, in her engineering mind frame and be balanced. And so
Mhm.
I've talked to a number of individuals who all say this. They want to be more well-rounded, I'll call
Yeah.
it, and balanced. So they want to be STEM focused or engineering or a space, but they also want to have this artistic side, I'll call it.
Mhm. It's interesting. Yeah, it is. It's a different generation, and when it's exciting all the different uh, types of work you can do, doing hybrids like that, doing something, yeah, that's using both sides of the brain, not just one.
Yeah.
It's great that opportunity is there. So, what's a lot of the listeners here are working in tech roles at tech companies and in a whole variety of different industries. What's something you've learned in your experience in the space world that a leader or somebody in a tech company could implement to help their business?
So what I've really learned over the last few years, it's 3 things. It kind of ties together. It's called
Mm.
listen, learn, and lead. And what I mean by that is I'm listening. I'm actively listening to my team, but I'm also listening to other stakeholders of
Okay.
Space Foundation in the space industry. I'm doing my own research. I'm learning from those proteges I'm mentoring. I'm learning from these individuals I'm interviewing for this book. I'm listening to what they're telling me, and then I'm learning how to create that workplace of the future, how to create an environment that they feel safe and want to work in or
Yeah.
want to come into this industry. And then by listening, learning, then I can lead. And so it kind of goes together that listen, learn, and lead. So that's my takeaway for anybody who's listening to your podcast today. It all starts with listening.
Okay. That's good. And that is that's different than the way some companies have done in the past where the top level tells you what to do. So that's good. It's a great tip, and thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely.
So
Thank you.
so what's ahead for you and kind of in the team that you work with for the rest of the year and into next year?
So we're super excited about what 2023 looks like. We have our annual space symposium that will take place April 17th through the 20th in Colorado Springs. This will be our 38th Space Symposium. Space
Okay.
Foundation has been in business 40 years, so we'll be celebrating our 40th anniversary this year in March and our 38th Space Symposium. And Space Symposium is where we bring together the global space community, military,
Okay.
commercial, civil, international. They come to Colorado Springs, around 10 to 15,000 people, to talk about the future of the space industry. We also bring in our international teacher liaisons. We have a special program through that Center for Innovation and Education I told you about, called an International Teacher Liaison Program, where those teachers get to come in. They get to
Oh,
attend
nice.
those unclassified sessions. They get to go through the exhibit hall. We do a special program for them. And then they get to take that all back to the classroom and share it with their students and other teachers about how exciting the space industry is. What are the
Cool.
opportunities? We'll also be doing a workforce track that highlights the international components that I shared with you, the organizations we partner with, ISESCO, the African Union, Singapore Space Agency, and others, about how we're partnering together to build that future workforce and ecosystem.
Okay.
So that's one thing. We also have a lot of great partnerships we're doing where we're bringing our programs into school districts. So here in Colorado, Pennsylvania, Maryland, we're talking with Florida about how we can bring that leadership academy I shared with you into schools to start building the pipeline for the future workforce. And then, of course, we're in discussions with organizations both in the US and around the world for that adult education, those entrepreneurial programs, that young professional mentoring and training, so
Hmm.
that we're nurturing that future
Yeah.
workforce. So we have a full calendar. I actually sat down with my team and said, okay, let's lay out the rest of the year. I know it's January, but it's going to be 31 December before we know it. I'm
Hmm.
excited.
Sounds like a very busy year. So you have to a lot of organizing. That's good. Well, thank you for your time. It was great, and your knowledge, your experience was very valuable, and I've learned a lot. I know the listeners have too. If people want to learn more about the Space Foundation or get in touch with you with any questions, what's the best way to reach out?
Fantastic. Well, we do have our website, spacefoundation.org. You can
Hmm.
also follow us. We're on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and I am also on LinkedIn and Instagram, so you can also follow me. I try to put out some great, insightful articles, job opportunities, fellowship programs, intern programs on my LinkedIn and post those things. So if your audience is interested in that, and it's international as well. The United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs. Um, Space Generation Advisory Council. So I post a lot of great information for anybody who
Okay.
wants to dip their toe in and learn a little bit. I'm also a member of the Forbes Technology Council, and I just had an article come out today on my predictions for 2023, what I'm predicting. So you can follow me also on Forbes, and I do an international series for space news, and I talk about different countries and their ecosystem. So last month I had one come out on Chile, and I'll be having a article coming out shortly on Canada. So I try to, again, help your audience hear all the diversity that's taking place in the
Yeah.
space industry, and not just diversity of people, but diversity of ages, diversity of regions of the world, diversity of jobs and career opportunities.
Okay. That's information. I've seen a lot of your articles. I saw one of your Forbes articles on quantum computing in space. That was very interesting.
Thank you.
So I'll get links to the website and to your LinkedIn profile and Instagram and everything in the show notes. So it'll be easy for people to find you and connect. So
Absolutely.
thank you again for your time. I know you've got a busy schedule. You just told us how busy it is. And I appreciate the time to talk and you sharing your knowledge and experience with the audience.
Well, thank you, Steve. I'm so grateful to be here. And again, that workforce development roadmap, that first step is awareness. And so joining you today
Yeah.
was taking that first step in creating awareness for individuals that there's an opportunity for them in the space industry. And until then, I look forward to seeing you around the galaxy.
Thanks, Shelley.